In Rome, sometime in late 896 or early 897, a pope summoned his predecessor to judgment. There was only one obstacle. The accused had been dead for months. The body of Pope Formosus was removed from its grave, clothed in papal vestments, and presented before an ecclesiastical synod. Pope Stephen VI presided. The verdict would reach far beyond the dead man before him. The episode is now called the Cadaver Synod. Its central fact is as extraordinary as the title suggests, but the familiar image of a corpse on trial can hide what the proceeding was designed to do. This was not a criminal court in the modern sense. It was a struggle over whether Formosus had ever been a legitimate pope, whether his decisions still had authority, and whether the clergy he had ordained could continue to hold office. Explaining why the dead were made to answer for the living means leaving the spectacle behind and entering the divided world of late 9th century Rome, a world in which popes, emperors, bishops, and rival political factions contested the power to decide what was lawful, and even what counted as the past. Before Formosus became pope, he was Bishop of Porto, one of the important episcopal sees near Rome. He was an experienced churchman, but also a controversial one. In 876, during a conflict with Pope John VIII, Formosus was condemned and excommunicated. He was later reconciled with the Church, although the precise conditions attached to that reconciliation survive through disputed and partisan accounts. That history mattered because a bishop was understood to be bound to his see. Moving from one bishopric to another could be attacked as an act of personal ambition rather than service to the Church. When Formosus became Bishop of Rome in 891, his opponents could argue that the former Bishop of Porto had taken a position he was not entitled to hold. Not everyone accepted that interpretation, but the question of episcopal transfer was serious enough to become one of the central issues surrounding his papacy. The religious dispute unfolded inside a political crisis. The old Carolingian order had fragmented. Rulers competed for territory, recognition, and the imperial title. In Italy, Guy of Spoleto and his son Lambert held power, while Arnulf of Carinthia advanced his own claim. Papal coronation could give that claim sacred and political weight. In 892, Formosus crowned Lambert co-emperor alongside his father. 4 years later, after Arnulf entered Rome, Formosus crowned Arnulf emperor in February 896. That reversal has often been used to explain everything that followed. In the traditional version, the Spoletan side took revenge through Stephen VI. Yet direct control by Lambert or his mother, Egeltrude, is not established, and Lambert would later participate in Formosus's rehabilitation. The conflict is essential context. It is not a complete solution to the mystery of motive. Formosus died on 4 April 896. Boniface VI succeeded him, but his pontificate lasted only a short time. By May, Stephen VI occupied the Roman See. Months later came the proceeding remembered as the Cadaver Synod. Its exact date is less certain than many retellings imply. It occurred in late 896 or early 897 and is conventionally placed in January 897. Stephen convened a Roman ecclesiastical synod and had Formosus's body exhumed and presented for judgment. No complete, neutral transcript survives. Near contemporary annals, partisan defenses, conciliar material, and later histories preserve different parts of the event. Some are close in time but deeply invested in its outcome. Others are more vivid but were written decades later. One later writer, Liutprand of Cremona, represented Stephen as challenging Formosus over his move from Porto to Rome. But Liutprand was not recording the proceeding as an eyewitness. His chronology is confused, and his direct speech cannot be treated as courtroom minutes. What can be said more securely is that the case attacked Formosus's legitimacy. His opponents accused him of unlawfully leaving the See of Porto for Rome and of violating earlier obligations. These were not accusations against a body in any practical sense. They were arguments about whether Formosus had possessed lawful authority while alive. The synod found against him. Formosus was stripped of papal status. His pontificate was declared invalid, and the proceeding moved to invalidate his ordinations. His remains were removed from the customary place of papal burial. Accounts also report that fingers were cut from his right hand and that the body was later thrown into the Tiber. But the sources disagree about the number of fingers and about the precise sequence. Later writers added symbolic explanations that cannot be recovered as certain fact. Those uncertainties matter. The purpose of careful history is not to make an extraordinary event less extraordinary. It is to prevent later detail from replacing evidence. The corpse was brought before the synod. Formosus was condemned after death. His papal authority was attacked. Those facts are already enough to show how far Stephen was prepared to go. But the proceeding's most important target was not buried in a grave. During his pontificate, Formosus had ordained clergy. Their standing rested on acts performed under his authority. If Formosus had never been a lawful pope, what did that make the bishops, priests, and deacons whose offices came through him? The verdict turned a judgment against one dead man into a crisis for living churchmen. Among those caught in that crisis was Auxilius, a priest associated with Naples who had been ordained by Formosus. Auxilius wrote in defense of Formosan ordinations and against demands for reordination. His work is not neutral. He had a direct personal stake in the argument. That is precisely why it reveals the consequences so clearly. For clergy like Auxilius, this was not merely a dispute over the reputation of a former pope. It could determine whether their ordinations counted, whether they could exercise their offices, and whether acts performed through them remained secure. The question exposed a dangerous chain of dependence. A pope ordained bishops. Bishops ordained other clergy. Those clergy administered rites and governed churches. If a later pope could reach backward and declare the first pope illegitimate, how far did the invalidity spread? The evidence does not justify saying that every ordination Formosus performed everywhere was effectively erased forever. But the synod declared his ordinations invalid and placed the authority of affected clergy under threat. The controversy that followed shows that this was not an empty gesture. It also explains why the proceeding cannot be dismissed as an outbreak of irrationality. The treatment of the corpse was extreme, and even hostile near-contemporary writers struggled to describe it. Yet the act served an institutional purpose. By degrading Formosus physically and legally, Stephen's synod attempted to make a statement about the limits of legitimate office. The body made that statement visible. The ordination policy made it consequential. Politics remained inseparable from the dispute. Formosus had crowned 2 rival claimants in 4 years. Arnulf's power in Rome had receded. The Spolitan rulers again mattered. Roman aristocratic interests and clerical factions also had stakes in who could define the papacy's recent past. But the sources do not allow us to name a single hidden author of the entire proceeding. Stephen VI convened and presided over it. Beyond that, claims that Lambert or Ageltrude certainly ordered him to take revenge go further than the evidence. Lambert's later acceptance of Formosus's rehabilitation makes the simple version even harder to sustain. The most honest answer is also the most revealing. Several political and ecclesiastical conflicts converged on Formosus's memory. The exact balance among them remains uncertain. Then, the judgment against Formosus began to turn against Stephen. Later in 897, Stephen VI was removed from office, imprisoned, and strangled. These events followed the Cadaver Synod amid intense opposition and factional conflict. but the evidence does not prove that a single wave of public horror by itself caused his fall. Stephen's death did not automatically settle the status of Formosus. That required new acts of authority. During a brief pontificate later in 897, Theodore II reversed Stephen's judgment, rehabilitated Formosus, and restored his burial. Then, in 898, Pope John IX pursued a broader conciliar settlement. Councils associated with Rome and Ravenna confirmed the rehabilitation, protected Formosan ordinations, and adopted measures against putting dead persons on trial. The surviving conciliar material has a complicated manuscript history, but the direction of the reversal is clear. The sequence matters. Theodore restored Formosus first. John then used councils to strengthen and formalize the reversal. These were separate stages, not one sudden act, and the politics refused to fit a simple morality play. Lambert, the ruler often placed at the center of the revenge theory, was present in the political world of the Ravenna settlement and confirmed Formosus's rehabilitation. That does not prove Lambert had no role in the earlier conflict. It does mean that the Spolitans' ordered revenge cannot stand as a complete and certain explanation. In less than 2 years, papal authority had been used to condemn Formosus, restore him, and then confirm that restoration. Each settlement claimed the power to define which acts were valid and which version of the recent past the Church would recognize. The corpse had become a battlefield over institutional memory. Even John IX's settlement did not end the controversy permanently. When Sergius III became pope in 904, he revived the anti-Formosan position and again pressed the issue of reordination. Later accounts sometimes expand this into a second trial of the corpse, but the evidence reviewed here does not support another exhumation and cadaver proceeding. The persistence of the dispute shows why the synod mattered beyond its shocking image. Formosus's enemies were not only attacking a dead predecessor, they were testing whether authority could be cancelled backward, whether a later regime could declare that an earlier pontificate had never lawfully existed. His defenders answered with a different principle. The Church could not remain coherent if every change of power reopened every ordination and every act. Neither side left us an impartial record. Near contemporary defenders wrote with careers and offices at stake. Later historians shaped the episode around the concerns of their own time. The surviving councils come through difficult manuscript traditions. Certainty narrows as the details become more cinematic. Yet the central outline remains firm. A pope judged his dead predecessor. The condemnation threatened the authority of living clergy. Stephen fell. Other popes reversed his work, and the argument continued. The Cadaver Synod survives because its central image seems almost impossible. The dead summoned into a contest they could neither answer nor escape. But Formosus was not truly the only defendant. On trial with him were the decisions of a previous government, the legitimacy of ordained clergy, and the right of one pope to erase another. The corpse gave Stephen's judgment its terrible visibility. The struggle over authority gave it meaning. That distinction is why the uncertain details should remain uncertain. We do not need invented dialogue, a precise count of mutilated fingers, or a perfect revenge plot to make the story memorable. What the evidence supports is more unsettling. Institutions can attempt to govern the present by prosecuting the past. For a brief moment in Rome, that attempt took the form of a dead pope seated before the authority that intended to unmake him.